Welcome to the World Today. I'm Sana Maqbool, and in today's show, we will be talking about the emerging situation in Kashmir, which continues to deteriorate, of course, as the Indian forces continue to militarize the zone, and the lockdown and curfew restrictions are still there since the 5th of August. We'll talk about how the situation in Kashmir is resonating with the international community at large, and the efforts by Pakistan, are they putting a tangible pressure on India or not, and what is the way forward in this regard. We'll also be touching upon the State Bank of Pakistan, which is scheduled to announce the new monetary policy today, and we'll see how analysts are viewing the expectation that the policy rate will be cut or will remain at 13.25%. So we'll have an economist who will be speaking to us in this regard, and we'll see what his analysis is. To talk more about Kashmir, in the studios we have with us our guest. Let me first introduce Member British Parliament, Mr. Afzal Khan. Thank you for being with us today, sir. And we also have the senior analyst, Rana Tharjaved. Thank you for being with us today, sir. I'll start with you, Mr. Afzal. Of course, you've seen the situation in Kashmir since the 5th of August continuing to deteriorate. And even though these issues are being highlighted by Pakistan at various fora, and we've seen that influential leaders from all over the world are also trying to raise the issue, what do you see going forward? Are these discussions and platforms and the awareness in the world community at large going to actually result in something more tangible for the Kashmiris who are suffering today?
Well, if it does not lead to any changes, then they're worthless. The stark reality on the ground is that the millions of people in occupied Kashmir for 44th day now, they've been locked down. If you just imagine your own self, your family being locked down for 44 days in your house, just imagine all the needs of a human. How would they be meeting it? And how is it acceptable in the 21st century government which wants to claim to be the largest democracy abuses in such a human rights of these millions of people? It's just totally unacceptable. And for the international community to remain silent for so long is also shameful.
Right. Mr. Rana, of course, we know that Pakistan this time is refusing to have any backdoor talks with India or any sort of bilateral engagement until and unless the curfew restrictions are withdrawn. What do you think about Pakistan's stance on this matter in terms of not trying to engage with India unless certain conditions are met?
I think it's very fair because before 5th of August, Pakistan offered talks to India, opening Kartarpur corridor. And there were several, ongoing efforts from Pakistani side. Pakistan didn't realize or contemplate in that manner that India would go that 180 angle change to disrupt the entire peace efforts of Pakistan and the region. And imposing more than 800,000 or 9 million people, not letting them out, as Afzal Saab was saying, is horrendous in terms of the way they have basically categorizing these human beings. So it means that they have trying to dehumanize them, because this is the first step, as we all know about this Holocaust when occurred before the Second World War. The indication was actually in that regard was exactly the opposite. And I would say to basically to our diaspora and all other our people that we should continue, first of all, to highlight what India has done, and B, why international community is silent. There are a number of reasons. We can point out to two maybe. One is that India has an interest in the West and the Middle East and other countries, trade interest, vice versa, mutual interest. The other issue is that the West is equipping India to the teeth in order to counter China. It is not a story. I mean, it's not really fantasy. Even China always claimed that they are a defensive country. They're not interested. But in overall picture, these Kashmiris, these innocent 9 million people, have been caught very, very badly. And they've been treated really brutally. Because I was just, reading some reports which came very sporadically in Indian some media. Some people were saying, by the the verbal database, as we call oral database, that there are reports that in their army camps, they have heard a lot of cries, and they have heard people talking that there are more than maybe 10,000 now, or maybe 11,000 youngsters, and the night raids on homes and staging the rape and taking the young away to manipulate the household is the most common feature. If it's not true, then India should let it open and let the people come into IUK, so they will really then demonstrate whether they have done it or not. In our view, there is an ethnic cleansing going on.
Right, and of course, as you mentioned, economic interests are a powerful factor driving international politics. But of course, as we understand it, when we see humanitarian crisis or violations of international law or the atrocities such as those committed by the Indian forces in Kashmir, then of course there is a moral and ethical responsibility of the states, and especially when there are UN Security Council resolutions on the matter, to actually fulfill those. Do you think that the world is taking notice of the humanitarian crisis, at least if we even put the dispute at the side, but the humanitarian crisis there is very real with people suffering for so long now, especially since the 5th of August?
I think if want to be fair and honest and frank, then the answer is no. How is it acceptable for so long this to carry on the humanitarian points, irrespective of your positioning or what you think of the long-term solution of the dispute of this is? How is it acceptable for a country like mine, which is Britain, that for them to sit on the wall to show neutrality when they are permanent member of the Security Council, when you think about millions of people who are residents who pay taxes in Britain who are directly connected to this part of the world.
Right.
And when you look at the Commonwealth idea as well, how we are together as well, when you look at the ethical idea that the source of this whole problem was the British imperial history. So they have all sorts of different reasons why they need to be active, and yet they are choosing to be neutral. And this is why we need to be very clear on this, and this is why the parties like Labour Party, who have frankly said straightforward that any abuse of human rights must be condemned, and ultimately we must move to resolution in line with the UN resolutions.
And
This, I
surely
think, is fair
neutrality
thing.
is only going to help the oppressor. It's
Well, that's right. For you to be neutral, you are aiding the oppressor.
right. Right. Mr. Hannan, of course, we know that just recently, under so many of the draconian laws that exist in Kashmir, Farooq Abdullah has also been detained. And the laws that they're talking about allows them to detain people for up to 2 years, if I'm not wrong, without any charge or trial. And when you have a situation like this where even laws are amended to favor the occupation forces, what do you think is left for the people and for other communities to put pressure on the government when the law itself is going to protect the occupation forces?
I think, to be honest, a very easy, very simple answer, no, none. There will be no pressure left, because the way they have crafted this new strategy, which is Hindutva strategy, we can say, to convert India into Bharat, not to keep it as Hindustan even. And Bharat has an history, like, the BJP, for example, if you call it BJP. BJP is Bharatiya Janata Party. It's not an Indian party. You have Indian National Congress. So the idea behind revivalism of their extreme Hindu ideology, also detrimental to the Hindu religion itself. One, because that was not what they were been practicing. Majority of Hindus living in Nepal, in other countries, in Pakistan, they do not demonstrate that. But the way BJP is demonstrated, they are trying to erase all kind of neutrality, democracy, social, I would say, cohesion, human rights from their surface of their constitution. And in practice, they have done exactly, removing 370, 35A, mean creating a precedent within India that if other states, if they want to, they can bring them exactly under the direct rule of Delhi. And that is what dangerous, because fragmentation and disintegration of India is going to be bad for the region. That is why, whereas the most important issue is Kashmir in this regard, that's why it flowed from there, there must be an intervention from international community forecasting that how this will resonate in future. Because if they stay more in power, the things may get worse and worse for Muslims, for Christians, for Dalits, for Sikhs. And this is not something, it's an open secret. You can see the countless documentation done by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. the Human Rights Commission in Geneva released 2 reports. APPG, All Parties Parliamentary Group, which Mr. Afzal is the vice chair of on Kashmir, they released a report. And the other reports were released from the European Union. So there are a series of reports released already. So that's what I said in my intro, that there are pre-indicators and indications of that the Indian military, which has displayed very unprofessional way to maim, blind, or kill their own people in India, in Kashmiri people, it means there must be an intervention before a great tragedy occurs. We have seen.
Right. Right, and as you mentioned, of course, not just the reports, in fact, even the policies that are being pursued by the Indian government are very obvious in this regard in terms of what's happening in Assam or the NRC policy.
Yeah, almost 2 million people,
exactly.
Yes.
So they're very obvious indicators of what is going on or what the regime's ideology is.
Right.
But Mr. Azhar, do you think that the perspective that India puts forward of being a secular democracy, is that changing now because of these policies?
Well, they would struggle, though fundamentally, if you think about it, of what the behavior that is taking place in their own country against the minorities is not acceptable to the international standards, and what they're doing to this occupied area of Jammu and Kashmir equally is not acceptable. So the match between their actions and what they claim is so huge that nobody actually believes this is true. I mean, if you look at the Kashmir itself, they're saying that we want to help to improve the situation in Kashmir, economic prosperity. What, on gunpoint? Locking down people for 44 days? How is this? So I think more and more the world is becoming critical on this. That is why if you look at the international media now, that at least 80% of the coverage on India actually is on negative. And this actually not in the interest of India itself. So the people of India need to wake up that the government they have is extreme government, and there seems to be an excess of extremism developing here between Modi, the American President Trump, and Netanyahu from Israel. And this is dangerous, the behavior that they are all displaying, particularly Islamophobic, I would say.
Right. Mr. Rana, of course, we know that President Trump has offered to mediate now, and he's done it before also. But how much can we really count on his offer of mediation since, of course, he did fall back on his words before. So when we look towards the US or other states for support in this matter, what do we really expect from them?
I think we should not expect, but I would say that we should continue our efforts. The reason being that one way or the other, the major powers will have to intervene, whether in the first stage to convincing India or insisting on them to lift the curfew, to normalize it, and then in the second phase to convince India and make them realize that it's good for the peace that they reverse the 370A and 35A. Even there is a belligerent talk from Indian ministers, their chief of army staff. I still think Pakistani leadership, both military and civilian, behave very maturely, but we should not exclude US or Western powers just because President Trump had said one time, because diplomatically speaking, this is the way the leaders behave when they have their own national interests in mind. We should continue to pursue President Trump that this is detrimental for the regional and the world peace. Subsequently, if there is a clash or war occurs between Pakistan and India, and not shared by the involvement of nuclear weapons, but also by share of the intense rhetoric which is coming out of India. So everyone is afraid in the region from India that because an Hindutva follower government is ruling, and they have a finger on the nuclear button, they can press it or they can launch. They said that we do not may not adhere to the no first use. These statements are not said by a journalist or an academic or a think tank. These are categorically said. Very recently, the Chief of Army Staff of India has actually threatened Pakistani, they said about the AJK and the Gilgit-Baltistan. Well,
Right.
this is not acceptable simply because they must understand what they intended in February and what they got in response. You know, they got a bloody nose, 3 planes down, 1 prisoner of war, and this they must understand. So on our part, we should, of course we should not respond in belligerent manner because Pakistan is a very mature nation in terms of they understand what war will bring to the region. We have been through 4 wars. India, on the other hand, is a bigger country, larger population, but still they do not understand this. So I would say that it is our responsibility to tell the world and keep telling the world. Because I personally do not believe that you just tell twice if President Trump this and this has gone. No. They understand as well. So we keep pushing them, keep advocating our national narrative, national interest, and trying to convince President Trump and this administration that it is in the larger interest of the US. Because next door is Afghanistan. United States and the NATO forces really literally bogged down for so many years. They wanted to get out of it. Having another conflict like in the Middle East, we have a very serious situation. So I'm sure that a time will very soon come in which President Trump and administration and the Britain, from where the British Parliament, or despite of their own issues, they still have a very big clout in the world. And France, they will understand, convince India, normalize, free those 9 million people being taken hostage since 5th of August. And then let the world look into what you have done to those people. So I think we should continue. We should not stop. It's fine if he said yes and then he said no, but I heard again that he still wants to mediate. He said, I'm keeping this statement intact and we will do if parties are ready. We are ready. Convince India, that is the responsibility of the United States and other major powers.
Right, and like you mentioned, despite the Indian warmongering, the Pakistani side has always been talking about not being in favor of war, but just saying that, of course, if there is an act of aggression, they are going to respond. And even if there's not, even if we take aside the threat of nuclear war, which is going to impact the whole world, if that is going to happen, even if a military conflict itself will have impact on not just India and Pakistan, but the region at large. We've seen us getting affected by the Afghanistan war as well. So when we look at any chances of military conflict, as Shah Mahmood Qureshi has mentioned, accidental war, since the situation may escalate at any time and is miscalculated, do you think that this threat is being taken seriously by the regional countries or the people at large? Because at the end of the day, these are 2 nuclear armed states we're talking about, and the situation keeps on deteriorating. And especially if we look at a volatile government in India, we can expect anything to happen.
Well, I think my understanding is they are not taking it seriously. Saying that we are ready to intervene is not good enough. The fact is that this same position has what in the past we've had. The countries saying they're willing if we are asked. The danger that exists is not only 2 nuclear powers, but 3 nuclear powers. China, India, Pakistan are actually embroiled in this dispute. And the world cannot afford this miscalculation, misadventure, and leading to a nuclear war. And therefore, this is why I believe what the position these powers are taking is not good enough. They need to be more proactive, they need to be engaged, and they need to get this issue resolved, because a nuclear war certainly the world cannot afford.
Right, as Mr. Rana mentioned, that if India is not ready to come to the talk and resolve this issue, then really in what capacity can other states play the role of mediation when one party is not even willing?
Well, if you can understand this risk and the danger that exists, then under the UN itself, the chapters, they have the ability to escalate the sanctions against India, even to the extent of Chapter 7. So these are the means available to them. But the point is, do they see this danger there or not? At the moment, I believe they're not, and the risk actually is getting higher and higher. The longer this issue carries on, the more risks there is of miscalculation, mismaneuver for someone, and then getting out of hand, and we're ending up into a world war in that sense as well. The nuclear war would affect the whole world.
Right. Mr. Nana, we know that the Prime Minister is going to be taking up this issue in the UN General Assembly on the 27th of this month. And we know that the momentum of this discussion has been going on since the 5th of August due to Pakistan's efforts, and of course at different fora these is being highlighted. But as Mr. Afzal was mentioning, is the danger of this situation escalating really being brought to the forefront in these discussions?
I think Pakistan would definitely highlight it. I think India has been downplaying basically the risks, dangers, at the same time threatening us. But I'm sure that the world is aware about it because Amnesty International and other organizations, as I mentioned, are trying very hard. But I think it needs more political clout from these countries. They have to do it. And I mean, if we look at the support we are getting, it may appear really not much, but the concerns are very high because we had been there before in 1948, 65, 71, and then Khargil. We had been there. They understand that this is the real world. It's not a theoretical approach or the formula that we are trying to, they cannot avoid it. There can be two possibilities. Either they want us to go to war and create another problem in the region and then manipulate Pakistan, or they may intervene. I think Pakistan on its part should be ready for the worst and keep proceeding for a better approach to resolve this issue. Because this is very, very important. If you want to intervene, please.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, to me, the issue is aggression has taken place.
Exactly.
The fact is they have violated the Shimla Agreement, which was between India and Pakistan, and the fact is they have violated the UN resolution. And it has now turned to be that India are actually an occupying force in the occupied land. And therefore, that is aggression, and therefore there's a legitimacy from the people of Kashmir to resist, and for the rest of the world to see that this can lead further escalation into violence, which can then embroil other countries as well, which can then lead to a nuclear war. And this is why they shouldn't sit back. They need to be more proactive.
Right. Just for my understanding and the viewers' understanding, when we see that a violation has occurred of an agreement, and of course the UN Security Council resolutions are there and they haven't been implemented for so many years now, what really are the repercussions in case the resolution, whatever the resolution states, is not being met by the parties involved? Or even if, is there a timeline? I mean, if we waited 7 decades, are we going to wait 7 more?
Well, I think this is a discredit to the United Nations itself for allowing a dispute which has actually got a resolution. This is a unique dispute actually, which resolution is already agreed. All we need to have is the plebiscite being implemented. So we have the answer.
Right.
And for 7 decades to pass, for so many 100,000 people to lose their life, and we've seen now they're changing the whole game of the dispute against, so never mind implementing the UN resolution, they are going against the resolution. So this is why I think aggression has taken place, and this is why the world shouldn't sit back. The whole idea of UN is to maintain peace, but here their own resolutions are being violated and flouting.
So in case of a violation, yes.
Sorry, no, it's fine. You can continue, please. I'll just answer it later. You can continue with
No,
this.
my question was, in case of a violation then, what is the United Nations next
The
step?
Chapter 7 is there, and they need to escalate. As I indicated before, what's stopping then the world powers in order to maintain the peace in the world, to even moving on to the next steps, which would be on sanctions, the economic boycott. There's all sorts of things they could start developing so that India knows that world is serious, the world will not have this sort of violation taking place and putting the world peace at risk.
Right. Mr. Nana, you were saying?
I was saying that my intervention would be what Afzal was saying, that of course the aggression and occupation is there. And Chapter 7, of course, is an ideal thing to bring India to their knees and to reverse what they have done. But I'm afraid my intake is that it won't happen. What happened to League of Nations was exactly like this. The League of Nations also failed to create relations between this, intrastate conflicts. This conflict is not intrastate. It's a tri-party conflict, and in which Kashmiris are the main party. Pakistan supports Kashmiris because of the United Nations Security Council resolution. and also because it was an illegal annexation from the start, a forged, fake this letter of accession. All that practice was fake. You know, someone was mentioning about the person who negotiated, he never traveled to Srinagar that day. The British Deputy High Commissioner at the time is documented. If you mention, we discussed about it. So the issue here is that either we take this stand now, or then otherwise there will be a chance that the conflict will really expand from within Kashmir. It has a spill. It can have a spillover effect. If we can have more refugees, we can have more crises. There can be an armed struggle, indigenous from within India, 44 days keeping people at their homes and killing their young people and raping their women. Nobody can take it. Even in the most civilized world, if a small cat is just go in disarray, they will charge you for that. And look, the world is silent, and that's a problematic issue that cannot be resolved until they realize. Otherwise, United Nations will remain as you know, they will be redundant. But what we have to try is, in my view, we should also try to convince and realize, making these General Assembly members in this point in time, making them realize that we have already conflicts in the world which are out of our hands. Please do not let this go out of hand.
Right. You want to add something?
I think fundamentally what has happened now is the UN's flow has come open. And that flow in the UN itself is that the UN does not have teeth to actually implement its own resolutions. UN always has to borrow the teeth from another power. And those powers are only willing to lend the teeth to the UN when it's in their interest.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is a fundamental weakness of the UN. And if they're not careful, then they'll go in the same way as the League of Nations.
Yes, because in that sense, it just means that the UN is becoming redundant, because at the end of the day, if we're only depending on states, we don't need a united body anymore. In the same regard, I want to ask the emphasis of India and their claims of this being a bilateral matter or an internal matter. Are these claims also redundant now, do you think?
Well, I think it is. Their own constitution actually will say, and it does say, that actually it isn't internal matter. Why did you have these clauses in your own constitution? It was an internal matter. And the very constitution tells you how to go about it, and their failure to even consult the Kashmir Assembly shows that, and they suspended that, and the entire political leadership in the occupied Kashmir has been put under arrest. So how is this right? I mean, it's against their own constitution. And this is why I feel personally the Supreme Court of India's decision which has come through is really not good enough. They've just focused on one aspect, which is probably the humanitarian and the welfare side. But the substantial question which it raised, they've been silenced.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
Right. Rana Sahib, another thing that the Indian side seems to be playing at is to point towards Pakistan's involvement in Kashmir, or the fact that they've sort of categorizing the freedom struggle of the Kashmiris as a terrorist movement and all of that. How powerful do you think this play of words is?
Unfortunately, I have to say that the way India played underhand is very powerful, because the world wants to listen what they want to. And this is the biggest dilemma of the so-called civilized world, that the international powers do not realize that this may be the short-term solution for them, trade benefits and strategic partnership. But in the end, if the human values are not there, the next generation of East or West is not going to believe it. We have seen hundreds of protests in France against French government and the way they are ruling the country. We have seen in Britain, in terms of Brexit or other problems. We have seen in US against the unemployment, other issues, but also the issue of racism and the prejudice towards the minorities. So what I see is, from this angle, that it is going to be a long haul for us, but also it is going to be a long haul for India and the world if they do not normalize situation in IOK, because after all, you have asked a pertinent question that they want to categorize it, but the UN gives the right to all those being occupied by a force. They have given the right as a United Nations Charter armed struggle against them. India is facing 13 or more so from Naxalite area, in Assam and other places. So I would say that we should continue positively, engaging the world, the powers, and convincing them. So,
right, but as you mentioned, there were people of different parts of the world protesting against policies of their own government. We've seen a few elements in India also speak up against the Modi government, but the large majority seems to be appeased by their policies.
yeah, because simply the way the votes were given in the last election, Modi basically crafted these constituency, whereas if you remember, they were really divided. If they were 4, they multiplied. They were 4, so they made them 6. So they basically properly rigged in a way in which majority of Hindu population or those who were BJP, the supporters, they got the more chances. There has been a talk about it, but the Congress actually become Indian National Congress or opposition party. Practically, they are, being barricaded. And I think if Afzal Khan wants to say something about those 10 people were stopped, the major political party members to go into Indian occupied Kashmir. If you like to say something about it.
Well, look, I think all the charade of how calm it is in Kashmir, the way they want to display, gets open with the fact that when 10 leaders who are legitimate political party leaders from India are invited, remember, invited, and then arrested and returned, not allowed to go further from Srinagar airport, shows things are not normal. But I think the second bit I probably want to say is that clearly there are tensions within different sections of society in India itself as well. The way the route they are taking is against some of the early historical development of India. The secularism idea, everybody having a stake. By turning this into very sort of a strong Hindu nationalism, then you are excluding the many other minorities, which includes the Muslims, 200 million plus, the Dalits, 240-50 million again, the Sikhs, the Christians. So all those minorities are having a struggle as well. Then you get to the ultimate point, and that point is that this populism leadership is always dangerous. And there seems to be a trend here in the world, and I mentioned this, Donald Trump as well, Netanyahu, Yahoo as well, and of course the Indian Modi as well. This is also not good for the world as well. So in that sense, you then takes you the point that, bully, if you don't challenge it, they carry on being bully. So ultimately you have to challenge.
Right. So how important now, vital do you think the role of media is in forming public opinion, and especially that of Indian media? We know that there's not much that's allowed to enter into Kashmir, but we do have some reports coming out. But generally the opinion is of people in the world also is formed by whatever news that comes in and whatever perspective they're fed.
I think there are sections within India, people who realize the danger and the road that they're actually taking, and therefore they are speaking out. The 10 opposition leaders that I said earlier as well. But there is a wider point here. The media have a responsibility actually not to push populism in this sense, which tears the society apart, but those forces which actually unite. And this is actually the danger which exists now. A lot of the role of the Indian media has also been very negative. They are sort of egging on the society further than actually helping to calm things down, actually the rationale to develop.
Yeah, the media is owned, just to add to his very important point, the media is owned by all these now BJP zealous, and they are the one who are supporting it. They are the one who own the media, Ambani Group and other groups. That means it shows that they have full control of orchestrating all kind of inhuman or human rights violations against their communities. And it's all over India.
And the big danger actually here is not just for India, but anywhere in the world as well. When the ownership of the media starts squeezing into small hands, small number of people, then there's a real danger that their influence will sway things disproportionately to the reality, and therefore the damage they will cause. And this is why pluralism in that media ownership and transparency equally is important.
It's very important. Another thing that I want to talk about, Ms. Jaldat, is of course we know that the European Parliament is going to be taking up the issue of Kashmir and the atrocities that have been going on. What I want to know is the significance of this discussion and exactly what power does it hold in terms of being able to bring about any change or any steps that they can take. What is really in their power, in their hands, to actually make a difference?
Well, look, I was a member of European Parliament and Vice Chair of Security and Defence there. So I think I would say, first of all, it's a very important institution. European Parliament and the European Union is one of the most significant in the sense of that they understand the importance of peace, because their existence actually comes from the Second World War. They've seen the horrors of the war. So this is very important to them. And the second thing which is important to them actually is the human rights. They have always championed this, and they've also linked this to the economic side of the trade as well. Being the number one important bloc in economy point of view, they are also important, and therefore they can play this important role in this area as well. And I think this is exactly what they should be doing. And I'm pleased that this whole full hearing is actually now taking place. They've taken up this issue. They understand the seriousness nature of this better than many other countries. So they, I hope that will carry on and play a really important role in actually de-escalating, and if need be, they will link the human rights to the trade deals, which I think India will be thinking twice if once that happens.
Right. Mr. Rana, we'll just conclude here. What do you expect to see in the coming days, and especially what do you think needs to be done both by Pakistan in this regard and the world members at large?
All right. I think India is my very far-fetched analysis that India may normalize something before go to General Assembly in order to capitalize that they are trying their best to do it because the Supreme Court has asked them to do, because Indian government also needed to cover their, their crimes against humanity. So this is one my far-fetched analysis. It is possible. And for us to, I think, to be honest, General Assembly, this session has to be important. Despite of the fact, all the pessimism which comes out in the media or the rhetoric from the opposition, it doesn't matter. When there is a crime against humanity, it takes time to make the world convince and realize. The best thing is, as it happened in the Nazis ruled Germany, that they continued and they managed to create that impact of Holocaust. We should continue to reflect this, that the Holocaust in IUK will bring miseries for the region and for the world.
Right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us today and having this discussion. Of course, the situation in Kashmir continues to deteriorate. What is important is that Pakistan keeps up its effort and the world community takes up its moral and ethical responsibility in this regard. That's all for now. Thank you for watching.